The bruise on my daughter's arm was not what stopped me cold. It was the silence in her eyes. I had just stepped into the Langfords' immaculate foyer, that same marble tomb of a house where appearances were everything, when I heard the words that would change everything. Apologize to Case and Aria. You provoked him. Judith Langford's voice was as crisp and polished as the diamond brooch pinned to her silk blouse, but the steel underneath chilled me. My daughter, standing with her shoulders hunched and her hand wrapped around a purpling mark on her forearm, was being told she owed something to the boy who had hurt her. Kaysen, 11 years old and already a master manipulator, stood over her with a smirk that should have alarmed every adult in the room. But Judith, her grandmother, and my ex-mother-in-law saw only her golden heir. And Derek, my ex-husband, was nowhere to be found, probably on a business call or pretending this weekend visit was an act of fatherhood. I should have said something then. I should have screamed. But instead, I met Judith's gaze and held it long enough to let her see that I understood, that I saw her for what she was. Then I turned and walked out with Aria's hand in mine. Judith thought I was retreating. She thought my silence was submission, as it always had been. But she forgot something critical. I was no longer her family, no longer the quiet wife who smiled through insults and belittling comments. I was Aria's mother, and even the softest mother turns savage when her child bleeds. As we pulled away from the estate, Aria whispered I did not provoke him. Her voice was small, uncertain. That was the moment I knew. This was not an isolated incident. This was a pattern, and Judith had made one devastating mistake. She let me see it. She let me feel it, and now there would be no going back. Back home, I tried to shake it off, the tight knot in my stomach, the image of Judith's hand pressing into Aria's shoulder, and the way my daughter's eyes had filled with quiet resignation. But I could not ignore the bruise, and more than that, I could not ignore the way Aria flinched when I reached to hug her goodnight. That night, after she fell asleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sketchpad in front of me and a storm building in my chest. I was an illustrator, not a warrior. But as I turned over her arm in my memory, saw the shape of Kaysen's fingers etched in purple, I knew I had to become both. This was not the first time. The signs had been there, subtle hesitations before weekend, visits, the sudden quiet after coming home, the way she began to draw shadowy corners and lock doors instead of the bright animals she once loved. The next morning, over oatmeal and soft conversation, I asked her gently if anything else had happened. Aria stared into her bowl and whispered, "He locks me in the coat closet sometimes when no one is looking. Last time, he said, if I told Grandma would make me go home and never come back." My heart shattered in a quiet, disciplined way. I excused myself, stepped into the hallway, and called the one person who had always fought with me, not against me, Elena Moore, my college roommate turned child advocacy lawyer. "I need help," I said, "and I need to know I'm not imagining this." After listening to everything, Elena was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You are not overreacting, Quinn. You are finally reacting, and we are going to protect your daughter." Just before we go on, if you believe every child deserves to feel safe, comment the word yes below, and hit subscribe to stay with us on this journey. Later that evening, I pulled out my phone and began documenting everything, photos of the bruise, Aria's exact words, notes from her teacher's earlier concerns. I had spent years doubting my instincts around the Langfords, but now I would not let a single moment of pain go unrecorded. My silence was over. This time, I would not be gaslit into doubt. This time, I would fight. Elena's words stayed with me all night. I did not sleep, not really. I kept replaying Aria's confession in my head, wondering how long she had been carrying that fear in silence. I remembered every drop-off where she clung to me a second longer, every pickup where her eyes were just a little dimmer. In the morning, I called Derek. It went exactly as I expected. He sighed heavily, accused me of creating drama, then muttered, "Kaysen's just an energetic boy." You know how kids are. I kept my voice calm, even as rage burned beneath my skin. He bruised our daughter Derek. He locked her in a closet. but Derek dismissed me again, calling it a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. When I brought up the bruise, he said she probably bumped into something. You always overthink everything. And there it was, the gaslighting I had lived with for years. The rewriting of reality. It used to work on me. Not anymore. A few hours later, a message arrived from Judith. It was short, surgical, and meant to intimidate. I'm disappointed in your recent decisions. Bringing outsiders into family matters shows poor judgment and poor character. Aria deserves stability, not theatrics. I stared at her words, knowing full well she had sent similar messages to others, teachers, family friends, maybe even my landlord. I had seen this strategy before. Isolate, discredit, control. But what Judith did not realize was that I was not the same woman who once kept quiet at her dinner table. I forwarded the message to Elena. She responded within minutes. Let her talk. We're building our case. That same day, Aria's school counselor, Ms. Harper, called me in. Her voice was gentle but urgent. Aria has been expressing some concerning things through her art. She drew a picture of herself locked in a box, surrounded by larger figures, watching but doing nothing. My breath caught. Ms. Harper continued. She told me she feels safe here and at home, but not with her father's family. That confirmation was the last crack I needed to see the full collapse of the Langford illusion. It was no longer just Aria's word against theirs. The truth was surfacing in her drawings, in her silence, in the bruises they said were nothing. And I was done letting them rewrite my daughter's story. I had barely caught my breath when the universe handed me a match to light the fire. It started with a text from an unknown number. No name, no context. Just a download link and the message: she forgot the cameras saved to the cloud. You deserve to know. Good luck. My fingers trembled as I tapped the file open. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was security footage, grainy black and white, time-stamped for the previous Sunday. The Langfords' pristine patio, Judith standing in the doorway. And there, clear as daylight, was Kaysen grabbing Aria by the wrist, twisting until she screamed and collapsed. Judith stood motionless. She did not flinch. She did not step in. She simply watched. When the video ended, I stared at the screen, breathless. This was it. This was proof. No more, he said, she said. No more brushed-off bruises. It was Aria's truth caught in a permanent loop, undeniable, inarguable, devastating. I forwarded the footage to Elena. Her reply came in 3 words. This changes everything. The next morning, we filed for an emergency hearing and submitted the footage to the court. That same day, I posted a blog entry, not naming names, not linking the video, but telling the story. When they tell your daughter to apologize for being hurt. I uploaded it anonymously to a parenting forum, expecting little. By nightfall, it had been shared over 10,000 times. By morning, local reporters were reaching out. Teachers, counselors, even strangers were sending messages of support. And then something unexpected happened. People started telling their own stories. About Kaysen, about Judith, about bruises, silences, settlements, and secrets. One of those messages came from Jasmine, a former nanny for the Langfords. She had signed an NDA years ago, but said she could no longer stay silent. Kaysen did the same thing to another girl, she said, when we met in a quiet coffee shop. Judith covered it up. They fired me when I asked too many questions. Jasmine handed me screenshots, texts from Judith, calling a frightened little girl fragile and attention-seeking. I sent them straight to Elena. This was no longer just about my daughter. This was a pattern, a system, a family that protected its reputation over its children. And now that shield of silence was cracking, and through it the truth was pouring out. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in energy. The Langfords had arrived in full regalia, dressed in their signature brand of generational wealth and calculated calm. Judith looked every inch the elegant matriarch in a pearl gray suit. Derek, stiff in his pressed navy blazer, refused to meet my eyes, and Kaysen wore a tailored child-size sports coat, his arms, folded chin, lifted, smirking, as if this were just another family brunch. But I was not the same woman who once bit her tongue at Judith's table. I sat beside Elena, the video footage already entered into evidence, and reminded myself that I was not just a mother, I was Aria's voice when hers had been silenced. The Langfords tried to spin it. Judith claimed the video was taken out of context, that Aria had provoked Kaysen, and that children need to learn their roles in conflict. When the judge asked why she stood idly by as Kaysen twisted Aria's arm, Judith's answer chilled the room. Consequences teach lessons. Elena leaned forward. So physical assault is a lesson? The judge's eyebrows lifted. That's not what I meant, Judith sputtered. Then what did you mean, silence? But the turning point was not just the footage, it was the people who stood behind it. Jasmine, the former nanny, testified with composure and clarity, describing past incidents of abusive silence purchased with hush money. Then came Mrs. Dalton, the mother of a girl Kaysen once locked in a basement during a birthday party. Paid off, silenced, until now. Her voice cracked as she faced the judge. I took the money, but I knew another child would get hurt. That child is Aria, and I will not stay quiet again. The courtroom shifted. Even Derek looked shaken. Then Aria's school counselor took the stand, speaking of drawings that revealed a child's fear. She described Aria's regression in school and the protective instincts she exhibited toward younger students. Her final words struck deep. Aria no longer cries in therapy. She whispers, because she thinks being quiet will keep her safe. The guardian ad litem recommended full custody to me, citing emotional harm, physical danger, and the Langfords' consistent pattern of minimizing abuse. The judge called for a recess, but I knew then the tide had turned. Their empire of silence was collapsing brick by brick under the weight of Aria's truth. The ruling was swift, but the ripples it sent through the Langford dynasty were seismic. Full custody was granted to me. Judith and Kaysen were placed under a strict no-contact order. Derek, now stripped of his ability to hide behind polished appearances, was granted only supervised visits pending completion of parenting classes and psychological evaluations. I should have felt victorious, but what I felt most was relief. Aria was safe. For the first time in what felt like forever, my daughter could sleep without fear and speak without being doubted. That first night back home after court, she crawled into my lap, held my face in her little hands, and whispered, "You heard me, Mom. You didn't let them win." The aftermath unfolded quickly. Judith quietly resigned from every board and committee she once presided over with iron-fisted grace. No grand statements, no apologies, just vanishing headlines and canceled galas. Derek took an indefinite leave from the family firm, though his exit was less graceful, fueled by media scrutiny and internal pressure from once loyal clients who no longer wanted their names attached to his. But it was the Langfords' perfect image that cracked the loudest, and through every fracture, more truth emerged. 3 more families reached out through the blog I had started, each with stories of Kaysen's unchecked aggression and the Langfords' habit of sweeping it under the nearest antique rug. Jasmine and Mrs. Dalton became unexpected allies, sending messages of hope and encouragement as the public began questioning what else the Langfords had buried behind legacy and donations. Aria, meanwhile, was blossoming. Her art turned from dark corners to bold colors. She won a poetry contest for her piece titled, "I'm Not Sorry," a short but defiant declaration of self-worth. Her words were published in the state's children's literary journal. Her counselor called it a milestone of reclamation. And then came news that stilled my breath. Kaysen had been enrolled in a therapeutic boarding school in Vermont after a violent outburst during a required family session. According to Patricia, Judith's former assistant, it should have happened years ago. I felt no satisfaction in the consequences, just quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, the cycle might finally break. Because this was never about revenge. It was about ending silence, protecting the innocent, and making sure Aria knew the truth. Her voice mattered. Always. The Langford name no longer carried the same weight it once did. In town halls and courtrooms, in hushed conversations, and anonymous blogs, their legacy had shifted from untouchable prestige to whispered disgrace. But in our small kitchen, where healing began with bedtime stories and watercolor pages, The only legacy that mattered was the one Aria and I were building together. She no longer looked over her shoulder when she laughed. Her voice, once small and uncertain, now filled the house with poems and songs, one of which ended with the words, "I don't need your sorry anymore. I know I matter." And she did. God, she did. When I tucked her in one night, she asked, "Do you think Kason will ever say sorry?" I hesitated, not wanting to offer a hollow answer. "Maybe," I said softly. "But you don't need it to move forward." She nodded. "I'm not angry anymore. I just want to be happy." And in that moment, I realized something healing is not about revenge. It is about reclaiming your space in the world, about choosing peace without surrendering truth. I began speaking at local schools and parenting forums, sharing our story, not to relive the pain, but to show that survival can lead to purpose. Offers came in to write a book, to consult on protective parenting advocacy. But my favorite place remained the porch swing, with Aria curled beside me, watching stars appear one by one. One evening, I received an email from Derek. He had completed therapy. He wanted to talk. I had no answer yet. That chapter, like many others, remained unwritten. But I knew one thing: I would decide what came next, on my terms, in my time. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe silence should never protect abusers, comment "never again" and subscribe for more powerful journeys like Quinn's.